So Tracy's now talked through the different ways in which you can go about collecting data or collecting qualitative data via things such as interviews and also via focus groups. What I'm going to focus on here, just for the next sort of 5 to 10 minutes or so, are the different ways in which we can actually capture that data which is gained via the interviews and the focus groups. So there's a number of different options and approaches available to us, and I think, as we spoke about earlier on, they can lie within this continuum here, which have implications for both the time and the amount of resource that might be required to carry these out. So the first one, bear in mind, is this technique known as active listening. This in itself is where you are carrying out the interview, you're speaking to, say, your participant or speaking to somebody who is engaged with your service, and as they're speaking, you're then trying at the same time to make notes throughout and really capture what they're saying. You might want to keep these notes quite short and concise, and then what you can do is add to those notes and bolster them afterwards. It's in terms of when this is more of a practical approach to undertake. For me, it seems to be a very good approach if you are trying to do quite quick evaluation. You're trying to just capture the essence, I suppose, of what's been said within those interviews, rather than really getting into the nitty-gritty and the nuances of what people are saying. It also might not be an actual possibility to digitally record the interviews. It might be because of the amount of resource that's available, so you might not necessarily have the money available to get these transcribed afterwards, or because somebody has stated that they don't want for their interview to be recorded. So there's a couple of, like I say, a couple of circumstances where it might be the case that you want to use this active listening approach. But all of that said, there is a flip side, I think, to undertaking active listening. There is the potential to miss some quite key information, because what you're trying to do when you're applying this active listening technique is you are not only conducting the interview, so you're trying to think about the different questions that you might want to ask, say, your participant, but you're also trying to write down and capture what they're saying at the same time. So it does become quite tricky to do both of those two things and to do those well together. Equally, what can start to happen is, I suppose, when we go into interviews, we might have certain anticipations about what information might be gained or what might be said within these interviews, something called a confirmation bias. So you might start to become more attuned to things that you want to hear within the interview. And this is like quite a common thing to happen when using active listening. It's easy to pick up on certain words and write those down and perhaps miss out on some of the more subtle things. And it is, just as this sort of last bullet point says, it is, and I said it earlier on, but it is quite a difficult thing to do, to be able to write down what somebody's saying, to listen, and then also to really feed in all of what they've said into the interview thereafter. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of what active listening is. You've then got the other end of the spectrum, if you like. So this is where maybe you do have a little bit more resource. It does take a little bit more time. However, that said, what you can do is audio record your interviews and then send those off if you have the facilities to send those off and get transcribed. But this is at the other end of the spectrum, and I think it is a very useful approach to undertake when I guess you do have more time and you do want to conduct a bit more of a thorough analysis of the data, so you really are interested in the subtle things in which people are saying, be those, say, utterances, because a lot can be determined from utterances and say pauses in people speaking. It can signify, say, they're thinking a little bit more about something, or they're not sure about the response that they're giving. So there's a lot that can kind of come out in those subtleties and those nuances. But it also allows, and this goes back to what I was saying beforehand with regards to the active listening, it also allows you to understand the context around the conversation that much better. When you're using a technique like active listening, you're trying to pull out the key points all of the time. But what a transcript will enable you to do is it basically documents everything that was said. And so what you might find when you're conducting the analysis of, say, the active listening transcript or the transcript that's been written up, is actually there's quite a bit more detail when you have a full transcript in front of you, rather than, say, what you've your notes that you've written via active listening. And so all of that given, and going back to that confirmation bias that we were talking about before, you are less susceptible to having biases when getting it audio recorded and then transcribed afterwards. It does cost quite a lot of money though, if you are going to say send off your interview recordings and get these transcribed. So that's something to bear in mind. And when we're doing evaluations for, say, external organisations, we do factor in quite a bit of money to funding applications for things such as transcriptions. And equally, and this is both a positive and a negative, I think, equally, like when you are carrying out an interview, say a 1 hour interview, when that's transcribed, might equate to something around 15 to 20 pages of a transcript. So it does provide an awful lot of information. And I suppose, as I said before, that can either be seen as a positive or as a negative. It takes more time to work through, but equally you can capture some of those subtleties. There is an option, I think, which sits in the middle, and this is something called like a hybrid transcription. And this is an approach that we undertake quite regularly if it is not an option to have this transcribed. So you would conduct your interview as you do normally, but you are recording it, so you're using an audio recorder. You're also, at the same time as carrying out the interview, you are making some notes, but you're not trying to go into the same level of detail as you would do if you were using active listening. So you're just really picking out some of the key bits. And you might use those notes then to also filter back through to the types of questions that you're asking within your interview. So you're using the information gained to inform your interview going forwards. This, as an approach in itself, is actually quite pragmatic, because what it enables you to do is you can really concentrate on the interview, and you can concentrate on what your interviewee or your participant is saying to you. However, what it enables you then to do is to, after you've finished the interview, it enables you then to listen back to it and then to add in or fill in additional information. So you're not sending this away for it to be transcribed. You're simply making notes the first time around whilst audio recording it, and then you're going back in to then fill out those notes and add more information that you may have missed. So it's a really nice, it sits very nicely in the middle of this active listening technique and also just a thorough transcription. In doing this, it means that you don't necessarily have the cost of sending something away to get transcribed, so it can become a more practical solution from a resource standpoint. It's also a lot quicker than transcribing. If you're transcribing things yourself, it can take quite a long time just to, I guess, transcribe 1 minute of an interview. This is a much quicker approach because, again, you're just listening back to it and you're pulling out further details around what's said rather than trying to write down every single little thing. And in doing this, it enables you to go to that, like, I guess, a greater level of depth with regards to your analysis, because you're not just relying on key points, you're relying on like the key points from the interview and also some of that richer information that you get around it. However, as it says sort of at the end here, you do lose some of the nuance around how things are said. So you're missing out on some of those nuances, the subtleties, the uncertainties. You won't really pick out the gap, if you like, in somebody's, so after somebody's been asked a question and their response. You won't necessarily get that. But I think this hybrid transcription is a really good alternative. One thing that I just wanted to mention here, and I think it does fit very well here, is that some phones now are able to, within their recording functions, they are actually able to provide a real-time transcript of an interview. I've had a play around with these. I haven't used it within an interview context, but I have had a play around. It does seem that the software in phones now is getting a lot better. So that also might be another option, in that you record an interview on your phone, which is encrypted and the data is secure, but then it will also give you one long spiel of a transcript, which can then just be, I suppose, tidied up and used for analysis purposes. So just a couple of hints and tips then, if you're going to be using active listening or if you're using this hybrid transcription. If you're using active listening, really try and focus in on the main points and the main points only. I wouldn't necessarily focus on some of the utterances or the fillers. You're just trying to answer, I guess, your main questions that you're asking from your interview guide or your topic guide. They're the key things that you're trying to get out of this, but acknowledging that you will miss out on some of the subtleties. If you need to, ask your interviewee to slow down. It's quite a straightforward thing to do. People can quite often, when they're being interviewed, get really into it and start talking very quickly. And so just asking an interviewee to slow down would hopefully give you a little bit more time to write down what they're saying and to pull out some of those main points that they're also mentioning. One additional thing that you can do is ask. So you've asked a question from your interview guide. You can then actually go back and almost, so as your interviewer has said something to you, you can then kind of repeat what they've said back to them, just to double check that your interpretation of that is correct. But what that also does, it enables you to ensure that what you're writing down is accurate. And then the main point I think to note on this active listening is just to spend some time afterwards looking through your notes, that what you've written down, and just try and again add to those and make them as comprehensive as possible. I've done this sort of technique in the past before, and I've always looked back at the notes that I've made, and sometimes it's not necessarily all that understandable, and so actually there's quite a bit of work to do just to make my notes understandable, so that when it comes to the analysis in a few weeks' time, I can then understand what it is that I've written. If you're using more of a hybrid transcription, so that's the one where you're using the audio recorder and making a few notes, the key thing to focus on here is actually being very present in the interview. Not necessarily writing everything down, just writing a few key things down. So you're keeping your notes much briefer here. You might want to, if an interviewee has said something really quite interesting, you might want to write a note on that and then ask a question about that later on within the interview. But the main thing, again, as I suppose with active listening, is to listen back to the recording as soon as you can after the interview, to then add to those notes, because you'll understand the context of the interview much better almost straight after the interview, or say on the day of the interview. So try and get those notes written out in full as soon as you can. I just wanted to give you an example here of maybe what this type of active listening might look like. So these are two separate instances. On the left hand side, you've got an interview guide, and you can see there, this is more of like a hybrid transcription, and that I've then added to afterwards. So these are some of my main notes, I suppose, on the left hand side that I was just pulling out when interviewing somebody from an organization. So you can see that I've been circling things on the interview guide, just adding some keynotes, and then I would use those notes to guide my further conversation. On the right hand side, what happened was in this instance, the dictaphone didn't record, and I think we were quite lucky here, because I was at the time making some quite detailed notes about what the interviewee was saying. So after the interview had finished and I noticed that the dictaphone hadn't recorded, I then went back through these notes in quite a lot of depth just to add to them, because I was aware that there would be certain things missing within that within my or my active listening transcript. But that shows you, I suppose, some of the detail that would be pulled out within those transcripts. We're now going to move into one of the first tasks of this training. I think this is a really straightforward task to do. So what we'd like you to do is to click on the image of Jude on the right hand side of the screen. That will then take you to a separate window. And this is an interview that was undertaken as part of the Health Talks series. So Health Talks is all about trying to understand different health conditions and to get the perspective from the patients, or to get the perspective from people in the community as to what it's like to live with that certain condition. So in this instance, Jude, as I said, has quite severe chronic pain, and what she's talking about here is how she uses physical activity to help her manage that. What we'd like you to do then within this task, this first bit might only take you 10 minutes or so to do. So you've clicked on the image of Jude, it's popped up with her video. The interview with her, as I say, is only a couple of minutes long. What we'd like you to do is act as if you were the interviewer. So you're going to be, at the same time as, I suppose, hearing her speak, what we'd like you to do is use the active listening technique to write down and record some of the key things that she's saying. Write down as much information as you can, imagining that this was somebody you're interviewing for the purpose of, say, your project and your evaluation. So as she's speaking, trying to write down as much information as you can. It might not take you 10 minutes, it might not take you 5, but only try do this once. So click on the video, let it play through fully, and at the same time you're writing down as much as you can. So I'm going to leave you to do that. If you click on pause on the video, and then once you've kind of gone through that, come back and we'll talk through the next step. Okay, hopefully now you've all got your transcript in front of you, if you like, from using the active listening technique. What I'd like you to do is just have a think about how that felt. Did you feel like you were able to capture a lot of the information that was discussed within the interview? Do you feel like there were certain things that you missed? What would you do, I suppose, differently if you were to do it again? Would you focus in on certain key bits that you thought arose, or would you try and write much more information out? How would you see this working? Would you see this working if it was going to be, say, a 45-minute interview or a half-an-hour interview? I wouldn't necessarily expect that that would be the case, because it does take a bit of practice to do this. But yeah, have a think now, just for a minute or so. How did all of that feel? And what we'll do within the live session is actually come back to some of this and just really like stimulate a bit of a discussion on what you thought it felt like using active listening. Another thing you might want to consider is, well, okay, if active listening isn't necessarily for me, then do I think something like a hybrid transcription would be a more suitable approach, or do we want to rely on full audio recordings and getting it transcribed? So the second thing I'd like you to do then, and this kind of links into what I was just talking about from a hybrid transcription point of view, is if you click, so outside of this presentation, we've also sent you a couple of files. One of those files actually includes the transcript from the conversation and the interview with Jude. So what I'd like you to do now is to open up that file. It's part of it's within this folder, if you like, that's got this presentation in. So click on the transcript of Jude, have a read through that transcript, and this is what would happen in almost like a hybrid transcription. You wouldn't have the transcript, you'd have the audio, but it works sort of in a similar fashion. And look through that transcript and actually have a think about, well, look at your notes, look at the transcript, and then say, what have I actually missed here? Is there any additional information that I'd like to add? And just have a think then, almost like I guess a brief analysis of where you think the gaps are in using the active listening technique versus then using this more hybrid transcription technique. You might find that you didn't miss anything at all, or you might find that you did miss some quite key bits. And what we'll do is we'll have a discussion about this within the live session. And that's it. Thank you.